I've mentioned this before in a previous video, but I'm going to expand on it here today. This fight here between Shields and Marshall is the first fight in the current era of women's boxing that has the potential, and listen to the specific word I'm using here, potential to capture the imagination of the wider boxing audience. When I say wider boxing audience, I'm not even talking about casuals. I just mean the rank and file boxing fans who watch the sport on a regular basis. Because the majority of rank and file boxing fans do not care about women's boxing. I'm just being real. You've got fighters like Katie Taylor who have their own little niche audience, their little niche market within the wider boxing audience. But the majority of people who are not Irish and maybe some very left-wing type people, the majority of regular rank and file boxing fans don't care about Katie Taylor. And the proof of that is the fact that Taylor and Amanda Serrano were paid $1 million each for their fight at Madison Square Garden. That was supposed to be some historic fight and this unification, undisputed, all this type of stuff, and they're only getting paid $1 million each. Why? Well, because it's supply and demand. Compare that to what the male fighters get paid for these undisputed unifications. It's night and day. So the reality is, no matter what people want to say, the numbers don't lie. The reality is most people don't care about Katie Taylor, and I'm talking about most rank and file boxing fans. They don't care about Katie Taylor and women's boxing in general. But this fight between Shields and Marshall has the potential to be different. There's an old saying, no publicity is bad publicity. And what that means is, if your goal is to attract attention to yourself, then it doesn't really matter whether people love you or hate you, as long as they feel something strongly about you. What you don't want is for them to feel indifferent, because if they feel indifferent, they don't care, and if they don't care, they simply don't watch. So you want them to feel something strongly, whether it's love or hate. Now, Claressa Shields, over the past few years, for whatever reason, has cultivated a lot of hate online. There's a lot of people who do not like Claressa Shields for various different reasons. They find her, antagonistic, brash, arrogant, delusional, etc., etc., etc. There's actually more interest among rank and file boxing fans in the things that Claressa Shields says in interviews and online than there is in her actual fights. And the reason for this is because there are very few knockout artists in female boxing. And so, as much as all these people hate Claressa Shields, there's nobody around to iron her out. You see, this has always been a thing in combat sports. If you have a villain, people are going to pay to watch this villain because they want to see somebody knock them out. And many fighters over the years, male fighters of course, have used this to their advantage. They've played the villain. They've poked the audience. They've deliberately antagonized them because they know that it's going to bring even more attention and therefore even more money. So all Claressa Shields needs in order for her to actually start seeing some money in her career is an opponent who the public genuinely believe could knock her out. And that's where Savannah Marshall comes in. She is that rare thing in women's boxing, which is a knockout artist. Now, it remains to be seen whether her power is going to have the same effect on Claressa Shields. But again, that's where the intrigue is. People are wondering, will it have the same effect? Because Savannah Marshall's last fight was a devastating knockout win. So the ingredients are there to capture the wider boxing audience, right? Just in the same way that many male boxing villains, quote unquote, over the years have been in similar situations. Floyd Mayweather, his whole welterweight run was pretty much what I just described. Him antagonizing various different fan bases, particularly of Latino fighters, and then the fans of those fighters clamoring to buy the pay-per-view because they're convinced that their guy is going to be the one to end Mayweather's unbeaten streak. You know what I mean? The good guy and the villain, it's as old as the hills. And so that is what you have here with Claressa Shields and Savannah Marshall. And I'm not saying that Claressa Shields doesn't have any genuine fans who love her. I'm sure she's got those too. But just being realistic, you look at the comments she gets online and whatever, it's mainly people who strongly dislike her or even hate her. With Savannah Marshall, she's got her support up in the northeast of the UK. I don't think she's as well known internationally as Claressa Shields because she's not as vocal. But as I say, for this fight here, the fact that she is this knockout artist is going to be promoted. So if Sky, Ben Shalom, Adam Smith do a good job and market this fight in the right way, then I think this has the potential to do better than any other female fight for many a decade. I don't know what kind of numbers Layla Ali used to do or Christy Martin back in the days. Can't imagine they were that great. But I guess with Layla Ali, because she was Muhammad Ali's daughter, you know, she's got that name. Maybe she did all right. I don't know. But in the current era of women's boxing, this has the potential to beat all those other fights in terms of the attention that it gathers and generates. Now, Ben Shalom and Sky have made some interesting decisions, and I think good decisions, in the promotion of this fight. Just looking at it from a business perspective, they've decided to make this event an all-female card. That's the first thing they decided to do. I think that's a good move, because if you keep on having these mixed cards where you're putting female fights on alongside male fights, even if it's a female fight top of the bill and there's loads of male fights on the undercard, if you keep doing that, then you'll never really know how much of the audience are tuning in specifically to watch the women. So doing an all-female card is a good way to gauge where you're at in terms of the actual popularity of women's boxing and the particular stable of female fighters that you have. For the most part, I think people will be more accepting of female boxing if it tries to stand on its own 2 feet. So, as I say, I think that's a good move, making it an all-female card. Also, they've decided not to make this fight pay-per-view. And that, again, from a business perspective, is the only way. To put this behind a pay-per-view paywall would be business suicide, commercial suicide. You don't want to do that. Now, according to Ben Shalom, he said that the fighters, as in Shields and Marshall, wanted it to be pay-per-view. But I think that's really a vanity thing. You know, they want parity with the men and, this is a big fight, we should be on paper, all this kind of stuff. But if you're being sensible, like I said earlier on, it's supply and demand. You don't put a fight that doesn't have the kind of demand that a male equivalent fight would have behind a pay-per-view paywall. That makes no sense. And again, looking at the long-term future of women's boxing and trying to grow it as Ben Shalom and Sky are, you want to win people over. And the best way to do that, because, a lot of people, like I say, don't care for women's boxing. So the best way to do that is put it on regular Sky. Promote it across all of Sky's channels, the news channels and all this kind of stuff, and on all the different sports channels, and try and get as big an audience as possible. That's the way to do it. And that is the road that Ben Shalom and Sky have decided to go down with this fight. They're just putting it on a regular Sky fight night. And that is very smart. Ben Shalom also said that the ticket prices would be adjusted accordingly. So it's going to be much cheaper ticket prices than it would be for a male fight of, an equivalent male fight, which also is something you have to do, So that's my take on Claressa Shields versus Savannah Marshall. I did watch a little bit of the press conference and I found it to be weird. That's all I can tell you. The energy between them was weird. The vibe between them was weird. The fact that there was some type of audio issue whereby there was this horrible echo coming through both of their microphones. It sounded like the lapel mics or maybe the desktop mics that they had weren't working properly or something, or maybe they weren't speaking closely enough to them. I don't know. But there was just this horrible echo throughout the press conference, which Sky really need to sort out for the next one. And maybe that contributed to this feeling of weirdness. I mean, it just came across as awkward and weird. Claressa Shields, of course, is a very confident character. Savannah Marshall is more reserved. If you want to look at the body language, I don't know what Savannah Marshall's body language is normally like. When it comes to doing a body language assessment of fighters, it's going to be most accurate if you know what their body language normally looks like. If you're only looking at someone at a press conference for the first time, yeah, you might superficially be able to say this person looks confident and this other person looks a bit less confident or whatever. But fighters have different idiosyncrasies. As I've said before, there are certain fighters at the, in the ring during the referee's instructions before the first bell who always look at the floor. They never look at their opponent in the eye. If you didn't realize that that fighter always does that, you might mistake that for the fighter being afraid. Do you know what I mean? Not realizing that he always looks at the floor before the fight. Do you know what I mean? He's not afraid at all. Maybe it's just a little idiosyncrasy or superstition or whatever the case may be. So, I haven't seen a bag of Savannah Marshall's press conferences. I don't know what her body language is normally like, but just looking at it superficially, Shields looked the more outwardly confident. She looked the more obviously confident than Savannah Marshall. She thinks that Marshall is pretty much a hype job, and I know they fought in the amateurs and all that, but Shields doesn't rate Marshall. She thinks that Marshall's scared, and she believes that this is going to be, a one-way street, basically, in terms of punishment. So, yeah, that's my take on the whole thing. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And I'm going to reiterate what I've said several times in this video. This fight has the potential. It's the first female fight of this era that has the potential to capture the imagination of the wider boxing audience. I don't necessarily think it's going to make all these people turn into converts to women's boxing overnight. But with this particular set of characters and set of fighters for one night, I think it could do well if it's marketed the right way. So anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments below.